The news from Ireland was, as usual, brought to you by RTE, Ireland's national broadcasting service. And now, we travel back to the early days of transatlantic flying. Between 1939 and 1945, Foynes in County Limerick was the centre of the aviation world. Today it's home to the famous Flying Boat Museum, which recently expanded to include a full-scale replica flying boat, the Yankee Clipper, the only one of its kind anywhere in the world.
The control room is a fantasy of mechanism where the flight engineer's job is intricate. Spectacular view of Manhattan, though this is no sightseeing trip. It's a shakedown flight in preparation for transatlantic service. Yet that's a sight to see. It's a sky-going house flown by the pilot. His tricky job is landing the monster.
It's the late 1930s, and the era of transatlantic air travel has begun. This is the plane that started it all, the famous Boeing 314 flying boat, the first to cross the Atlantic. In 1937, the small village of Foynes in County Limerick became the centre of international attention as the landing place for the first commercial transatlantic flights. For a brief period in the 1930s and 40s, the port of Foynes on the Shannon Estuary was the gateway to Europe and indeed the world.
Flying boats were the means of travel at that time if you had to be an air passenger, and flying boats could only land on water. Foynes would have been a village with a population of about 500 people, but was a commercial port in a small way. So it's true what they say, location, location, location. It was chosen really for, it's on the west coast, obviously. It had a lot of the oil companies based here, so fuel wouldn't be a problem. But more importantly was its sheltered harbour. While the flying boats could land on water, they couldn't land on any old water. It had to be a nice sheltered area for them to come down safely. Lindbergh had been sent here by one trip from Pan American to source different places that they could look at to establish the new airports. And in 1937, the first trial flights came here from Port Washington, Long Island, and they were done by Imperial Airways and Pan American. When Pan American arrived here, De Valera was here to greet them, along with thousands of people who had come from all over the country to see this new phenomenal way of travelling. And Lindbergh was also here to wish them well when they left here to go back to the United States. And you must remember, the small village of 400 people located in a remote area of the west coast of Ireland was suddenly the centre of world attention. In July 1939, Pan American arrived at Foynes with the first ever passengers. Foynes then, from then on, became the central location for all traffic on the North Atlantic between the United States and Europe. And of course, the Second World War began a short time later, and even though Ireland was officially a neutral country, Foynes was a major location for the Allies, for getting troops and for getting supplies between America and Europe.
The Boeing 314s, or flying boats as they were better known, played a vital role in the introduction of passenger flights across the Atlantic. Only 12 were ever built, none of which remain in existence. In 2005, the Flying Boat Museum in Foynes wanted to build a cockpit or a small model of the plane. The project soon took on a life of its own, and a full-scale flying boat was built as an addition to the museum.
We were already going to build a cockpit, and then we decided, well, we'll also build a scale model of the plane. And this was quite a big thing to do because there was no existing one to copy. But we were lucky to get the plans from Boeing and all the blueprints, and we were even luckier to come across this amazing man, Bill Forover, who makes film sets.
He started talking about wanting to do this, a cockpit and a little tiny room, and I just said, no, I think this is boring. I'll build the whole plane. And what? How can you build a whole plane? I said, well, easy. Just just like making a small plane any bigger.
They all think we're totally crazy. This has never been done before. It just wouldn't be possible. Where would we put it? How would we get it there? Etc., etc. So we said, why not?
The replica flying boat was officially launched to great fanfare in July 2006. Now, for the first time since the 1940s, visitors could experience the early days of transatlantic flying. A very different world to air travel today, but strictly limited to the very privileged who could afford it.
Up to now, we had been explaining through photographs and diagrams what it was like, but now visitors to the museum can just step on board the Yankee Clipper and see for themselves what luxury and what an enormous aircraft she was. And at that time, of course, the greatest aircraft in the world. When you step on board the Yankee Clipper, you just walk back into the 1940s immediately. You're into the dining room, which had waiter service with shrimp cocktail and steak for dinner. And anything you wished, it was there for you. Then you have all these beautiful cabins which converted into beds at night time, so each passenger had their own bed to sleep on. But of course, at the back, you had the honeymoon suite. Now, that honeymoon suite was a more expensive ticket, but in great demand during the war, lots of weddings happening. Then upstairs, you see, it was two-story, and all the crew quarters are upstairs. These flights depended on the weather enormously. However, if everything went right for you, you could leave LaGuardia and land in fine 16, 17 hours later with a stop-off in Botwood, Newfoundland. Now, you needed space for that length of a journey. And people complain today, you know, they're 6, 7 hours. Okay, they don't have the space today unless they're up the front. But this was all one class of service, all first class, all the way. If you were fortunate enough to fly, you were either traveling on government business or else you paid. And you paid $365 for a return ticket to Foynes. And they tell me that was the average price of a house in the United States at that time. So again, it puts into perspective how expensive it was to travel.
The Foynes Flying Boat Museum was originally opened in 1989. And with its fascinating range of exhibits, it's long been popular with visitors. Now, however, with its expansion and new flying boat, it's become one of the Shannon region's must-see attractions.
We're very pleased with the development of the museum. I suppose in our wildest dreams we never thought it would come to what it did, from being a little corner of a building. We now own the building. We've increased the size by at least 10 times.
It has made a huge difference. Our numbers have doubled. I think the people get on board and they're just in awe of the whole thing to see its sheer size. And it's nice to be able to, instead of trying to explain to people by conducting a tour with them of what the luxury was like, it's much better for them to be able to go on board themselves and see it.
Well, it's the only one in the world. Apart from our Foynes Flying Boat Museum being twinned with Botwood and the only flying boat museums in the world, this is the only full-size replica of a 314.
The new and very popular addition to the Flying Boat Museum, they're located in Foynes, County Limerick.